This evening we're going to have what we call Dokusan, but it's an open interview. It's not quite the form that you would have in a traditional Zen Buddhist temple monastery. But we want to share this with you so you can see a little bit how this would occur. Not exactly, but similar. We've done this one time before. This is Chiezan. He's a fully ordained monk in the Soto Zen lineage. And I think I am too. So, and Chiezan's been a student of mine for
4 years.
4 years. So I'm really nervous about this. How about you?
Not sarcastically, yes.
So the idea here is that we'll have some question and answer, and then other people will be invited to ask either me or Chiezan questions about what is going on here if need be. And also, if this happens to end up fairly short, then someone else might be invited to come up. I probably won't pick on anybody, but would make it open if someone wanted to come up for an interview. So this is not exactly what it would be like if it were completely personal in the hojo or the interview room, but probably not too far off. So what would you like to discuss?
Something that's come up as a theme in my practice is aggression, and using others as a reference point for myself. And since our first ever retreat that I sat in the Doan seat, something that comes up for me is a kind of resentment when no one's in the Zendo, or when there's just a few people in the Zendo. And earlier today you said everything can be a teaching, and I'm trying to understand or see the teaching of the negativity that arises essentially without any real foundation.
Which is basically saying that if there is a foundation, you can't see it. If there is some kind of a cause, you're not able to see it.
Or it's fabricated.
Or it's fabricated. So everything being a Dharma gate or a way of helping you see is, in this particular situation, is just, it has to do with your particular attitude towards it. So if you can not try to shut down on it or justify it, here we go back into passion, aggression, and ignorance. You can work with that in such a way that you're a good host, that you can welcome it. Not easy. This does not mean that you suddenly are able to make friends with this negative energy that's coming up. And when that kind of energy comes up, this may not happen with other people. Everyone has their own bundle of karma, cause and effect, and so on that arises in our life. So the idea here is to accommodate that in such a way that you don't shove it away or go to war with it, that you don't go into passion or make a lot of excuses or justifications or go into stories that may or may not be true. This is a difficult part because may or may not have relative truth, but just going into the stories about it relieves the pressure that is caused by this emotion coming up. So it causes our awareness around that situation to begin to subside, because less awareness around that feels better. More awareness around that feels difficult or bad or like something should be done. And then, of course, ignoring is the third way of handling that, which is to find a way of shutting down on it. And that can happen lots of different ways. More.
Is there a way to refocus my practice, the vow is to be with all things, but in this case, it seems like I should be working with this before I start worrying about what anybody else is doing. How can I refocus my intention to wake up so that I can help others, so I can come back, and regardless of what anybody does, regardless if I'm ignored or in last place, my intention is to do this.
Okay. So practice a lot, as you know, and also begin to see on the cushion before any of this has arisen, any little micro movements of aggression, any very, very subtle pushing, very, very subtle shutting down, very, very subtle passion, or having a little tiny dust devil of a story that begins to be started. And working with those more, because they're so small, gives us a chance to actually find out where the awareness muscles, for lack of a better word, where that area really needs to be exercised. So when the bigger issue comes up, which may be being triggered, someone doesn't come in, and I know I'm understanding you to say, and I know we've talked before, that you really don't harbor any, you don't really have any idea that it's true that people should do this or that, because I know you're beyond that, and you understand, you work with that, but you still have the intense emotional difficulty. And so easy for me to say, well, just be with it. But it seems to be something that is worked with in its small amounts, and slowly work towards working with larger situations. The thing that is quite often missed is that we think we have to get rid of that situation, when actually what needs to be seen is the unacknowledged belief in a self that's actually having those emotions and feelings. It isn't so much the emotions and feelings, it's locating, if you can, the discontinuous identity that is claiming the reality of those emotions and feelings. And that takes a tremendous amount of awareness. That goes beyond conceptual structures, that actually, because of hope and fear, wants to stop at the concept and do away with the concept, or convert the concept, or change the concept, or ignore the concept to get rid of what? The pain.
So when I'm sitting, how do you find that area where I see that coming up, and just observing tends to snowball out of control? Is there a light touch that can be put in there to work with it?
What do you think?
It seems that it's always the middle way, but it's difficult to find the middle way when I'm so familiar with just one extreme of it.
What have you been doing so far when that happens?
Well, I try to tell myself a different story. I try to acknowledge that I don't know what people, like you say, people need to respect their body-mind situation, and only they know what they need to do. So I try to remind myself of that, but it's still very conceptual. It's shallow. It's that burning is still there, and I don't know what to do with it.
So the presumption that you need to do anything with it, to manipulate it, to push it, or pull it, or even to understand it more clearly, or any kind of presumption, or any kind of agenda based on preconceptions around it, will take you, it seems, further away, and take you on a circular journey that takes you away from seeing what needs to be seen, which is there's no self in the skandhas. There's no in the form, feeling, perception, concept, or memory and consciousness that is arising and are all hooked together and present us with me and this, me and this, me and this, me and my feelings. The belief, the incredible belief and just assumption that there is a person having these emotions and feelings in this, where this discontinuity of self is hidden, is actually covered by some kind of a covering that says this is all one thing, one me feeling this. And to see that discontinuity is what seems to be necessary. And if when the emotion arises, the feeling arises, if you don't accept it, reject it, or look away or distract yourself, then that which seems to be the identity, it seems to be the one who is having this, starts to become more transparent.
How do you do that? How do you not engage with the three poisons?
You see that you're engaging with them, but you need to see that you're engaging with them without engaging with the engagement. So you see that you're engaging, and you, I hesitate to use the word surrender, because it's not something you do. It's just that you don't go to war. When you see that you're at war, you don't have further war. Like you see in the world, when anyone goes to war, then somebody goes to war with them, then somebody goes to war with the fact they're going to war. There's some kind of a battle or struggle going on.
So it sounds kind of like the story arises, the emotion is there, to not do anything with that. If it wants to gain speed, it can gain speed. If it wants to burn hotter, it can burn hotter. How do you create the space where you can just watch that? You can see it burn, you can see it gather speed, momentum, and still remain an observer.
Sounds pretty good.
How do you remain the observer?
Well, then again, it doubles back on itself, is to see the way in which you're getting sucked into it. You're losing your awareness of it. You're actually getting possibly even entertained by it, or you actually are getting the feeling that you're accomplishing something, that there's someone who is actually getting a handle on it more.
So the aggression that I experience doesn't manifest physically so much, thankfully.
Yeah.
But it does verbally often. And in meditation, it seems that, I really can only torture myself. But the second I have a victim, it's much more difficult to not ride that train to wiping them out or really fighting. So what do you do in the situation where that story arises and you actually have, you could say, bystanders to your karma?
Interesting way of putting it. So, and you've heard me say this many times, and this isn't so much a solution, but it gives you a modality for holding your seat, and that's to stay in your senses. The five sense consciousnesses don't do much. It's the sixth one, or the thinking process, or the sixth, seventh, and eighth, as is talked about in Yogacara, philosophy, psychology. And so to just stay in something that is already fairly stable, the sense of gravity is fairly stable. Center of gravity is pulling you down towards the center of a big ball of earth. So that it might not be much, but it's an actual practice of working with what is actually happening now. That's happening. You can smell, you can taste, you can feel your clothing, you can even you can feel the thought process come up and start winding around and trying to twist you up into some kind of a demon, some kind of someone who has an axe to grind, and it seems to be, it's triggering something that is unresolved, that is probably pretty deep. It isn't about something that the person here has done. You already know that. So, but sometimes people act as triggers. And so when someone does something maybe that is maybe they haven't done anything, but say they have done something that is a little disrespectful, and just instead of just acting with that action as it is, don't, by saying, interacting with them in such a way that you acknowledge what it is they're doing and say you don't particularly care for being talked to that way or something like that. Or something where it sounds like you're saying that sometimes aggression comes up with when someone has just done something they're not even aware of, and you're feeling that. In that case, I think it seems to be necessary to notice that it's a trigger, and to actually see that this trigger can't be blamed. You can't really hold that trigger responsible for that. So I think, and that's something I know you're already working with. The intensity of the feeling, sometimes it's possible to, by staying in the other senses and including the other senses, it tends to diminish the power of that sixth, seventh, and eighth consciousness that wants action, that wants something to be done. Well, I want results. I want to be acknowledged. This is an intense feeling. I can't just ignore this. And so, also the sitting practice and meditation seems to, over time, the awareness will drop down lower and lower and and without you even knowing it, because it's unconscious, will start to operate in such a way as to release those areas. We talked about that before. There's areas that are locked up or stuck. Sometimes they're referred to as past lives. And like you've heard me say before, I don't necessarily promote belief in anything. Belief is silly. You either know it or you don't know. If you don't know it, you don't know it. But something is happening there with, ongoing life forms coming and going. And so it seems like that's what's happening in your situation. More?
I guess about communication, it's something I'm not terribly advanced at. And you talk about communication, cooperation, and compassion. And the cooperation part of communication, it seems that if it's not there, there's no communication, or at least a mutual exchange.
The cooperation.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, how do you communicate when either you have a resistance to cooperation or the other side is not ready to communicate in the same way? How do you work with that?
It depends. I see what you're saying. It depends on who the person is or what the situation is. Whether the person's as a practitioner, that sometimes helps. Sometimes it can make it worse, just because the assumptions are so strong there about being in the same practice. But I think getting an agreement to communicate, forget the cooperation, forget the compassion, but try to get the communication, and which, of course, or maybe not of course, but it seems that when we talk to someone, we need to see that they're hearing what we're intending. And sometimes it's something that is quite often missed, not only missed, but misunderstood, is the whole body, speech, mind complex can't be separated out. That's why talking to someone on a phone or texting someone, you're just asking for trouble. If you already have difficulty in that area, it seems to be necessary, as we've talked about before, to sit down face to face with someone, not challenging, but to get together with a person, sit down at a table or with two chairs facing each other and say, here's what we're dealing with here. Let's talk about this. Do you agree to talk about this? And sometimes this is done maybe on the phone. Do you agree to talk about this? Can we sit down and talk? And then when you do, then without interrogating particularly, ask the person to discuss how they see things, or what this particular issue is about, a misunderstanding about something, and to do it slowly. And when you're doing it, stay in your senses, because if you notice, I think anyone would notice that sometimes we tend to tend to bail out of our senses because we're being magnetized right up into our passion, aggression, and ignorance that's happening in our awareness and our thought process, and it gets very, very circular. This is not working. They're not understanding. I'm not actually buying into that and believing that something is actually true, rather than coming down and say, let's look. This is what it sounds like you're saying to me, and then do some, as they say, a reality check with it. So, and sometimes you might not be able to do that. Sometimes if it's a coworker or someone you're dealing with in that way, there may not be a way to get them to sit down to talk about it. But I think the body language is important in communication. So that's why the phone situation doesn't work so well more.
I guess something else that came up today is we were doing that contact awareness practice, and I mentioned it earlier, and I'm just trying to find a way to work with an unacknowledged or an unacknowledged aversion towards physical touch.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm just trying to find a way where I can create more clarity around why or what the aversion is to being around people.
Yeah. So that could be pretty deep, and like I have often said, and that I've said, is why questions work a little bit, but we tend to try to milk them, and they just become very circular. We get a why and a because and a why and a because. But to say what it is, actually fundamentally what is that, then we tend to sink down into the layers that are probably hidden to the circular inquiry of a why question. Why just gets you a because. And if you ask why to that, then you get a few more because responses. But if you say, what is that? It takes us into that texture. And that's not all in a day's work. Seems to take a lot of time. It has taken us many, many lifetimes to get to this, whether you think of them as your own lifetimes or just lifetimes in general, or just human lifetimes to get to this point. So sometimes what you're looking at as one single manifestation of a situation could have a whole lot of causes and conditions behind it. Yes.
You are a very affectionate teacher. Everyone in this room has probably received dozens of hugs from you.
Probably.
And I know that at the end of service, a lot of people like to hug. And I usually duck out and avoid that. And I'm wondering, because if this doesn't come up on the cushion because I'm already by myself, and I'm wondering, is there a way in the midst of all this affection that I can begin to delve into that because it's not coming up on the cushion?
So I don't think it's necessary for you to, suddenly become the hugging monk.
Thank you.
Sometimes this is thought of as introvert, extrovert kind of thing. And I would say a little bit about my past, as I was raised without any physical, very, very little, hardly any physical affection. I actually had to teach my mother to hug. So that was when I was getting older than you actually. And I was very confused about that, and had a lot of aversion to that when I was your age. I was not hugging anyone. So you get a pass there. So, but that's a good question, because there are people who really very much want hugs, and people who don't want to hug but will hug you anyway because they know you do. It's very complicated, and suddenly there's this whole incredible cosmology around hugging. Who hugs and who doesn't hug, and why they don't hug, and who gives good hugs, who gives bad hugs. I hate to hug that one guy, but this other person, and I'm extremely physical, as you said, but I did not know that when I was young. was all kind of very confusing to me. It was very painful as a small person. And so I would say that's kind of a personal thing. I don't think anyone is going to particularly, I'm certainly not going to require you to be different than you are. That may not be something that you ever particularly do. I don't think of myself as an introvert or an extrovert. Other people tell me what I am. Like people tell me which Enneagram I am, and I always go, oh, okay.
I guess I'm not interested in becoming a hugger,
I
but I am very much interested in understanding what that was, because the second you slap a blindfold on me,
yeah.
I'm touching as much as everybody else.
Yeah.
I just really don't understand that.
Yeah, and just so for people that weren't here this afternoon, this whole week is the theme of this Ango and Sesshin is coming up is looking into darkness. And so we've been having people do things like ink, brush and ink awareness, the calligraphy. People are doing that with blindfolds on. That's quite interesting. It's quite challenging for us to have that experience. And so the other thing we're doing is a contact awareness practice that is about, it's kind of like dancing, but mainly around moving around and bumping into each other and rolling over the top of each other and tugging and pulling on each other and having a good time, really. But we're doing it with some we'd have paired up and some would have blindfolds and their partner wouldn't. And so it's quite comical what was happening. And what Chiezan's sharing here is that, if I'm understanding you, is that without the blindfold, you're kind of standoffish, but with the blindfold on, you felt much more comfortable and much more tactile, and you're into it. Whereas the visual part of your experience is, so look how interesting that is. Because there are probably other people who would say just the opposite. The blindfold on, you don't know what you're going to touch, so you might be more problematic. Whereas if you have your eyes open, then it would be okay. So. It's interesting. More.
I have a very pragmatic question.
Yes.
So we're sitting 4-hour blocks sit in the morning, and I've been having a lot of physical pain, and even a little bit of physical pain, my mind can take advantage of to tell myself I need to move a lot, like regardless of how much pain is there. And I guess I don't want to rate my meditation, but is there something being missed by kind of just doing whatever my body tells me to do?
So I probably am disagreeing with the whole tradition by saying when your body tells you you're having pain and you should move. So I'm not sure if I'm directly addressing your question, but there's a lot of questions that people have around that. When you're sitting, you're holding still and you're endeavoring to sit there and your body is starting to ache. The Japanese Soto Zen tradition is about muscle through, and I think there's not all, but there's quite a bit of macho happening there. And I am not in favor of that. And I'm coming out of a situation of trying very hard to because of my own pride of wanting to do what other people who are very limber are able to do very well. So, and you've heard this story before, and I don't want to go into it completely, but it's the idea of I had to discover by forcing myself to hold still and not move by hurting myself. So I would say if I'm following your questioning, you should trust your body and not necessarily in that situation, not necessarily trust what your mind thinks about your body. They actually aren't that separate, and the body can think just as clearly as maybe more clearly. So I would say you should move. There's nothing to be accomplished by holding rigid. Is that what you're asking about?
Yeah. So if you're moving every 10, 12 minutes, it's really, really easy when the body starts moving to not see the mind.
Exactly.
So how do you work with the awareness in the midst of constant motion and your thoughts constantly being about motion and body.
I'm very excited about this question. I mean, because what you're actually saying what I teach. If your body is moving slightly, I'm not talking about your heartbeat or your diaphragm, but if your body is moving just a little bit of motion like this, your awareness is the objectivity of your awareness about the thought patterns is highly compromised. So here's how I would say to do it. Hold very still without being rigid. And if you can only do that for 5 minutes, then do it. And then at the end of that 5 minutes, then move or flex your body, do whatever you need to do to take the stress out, and then return and hold still again for 5 more minutes. So it's about holding very, very still for short bursts of time rather than holding very, very still and muscling through some kind of extreme pain that you're having. This is really very much misunderstood all over the place. It was misunderstood in Shambhala and certainly in Zen. And I was even told by category Roshi, well, rather than telling him, making 74 about my pain in my leg, the only thing I could think about is how everybody else is sitting very still. And I might as well be on a rack. My knees, when I'm in my early 30s, are hurting so bad. It was excruciating. And I told him, and he just, he's a guy who was born on the floor on a tatami mat. So he's, and of course, built a little bit different. He said, well, soak your legs in hot water, take hot baths. And so, keep doing it. And I remember asking, so you mean I can eventually do this? And, well, yeah, you can do it. It's just a matter of, like treating everybody the same. Yeah, everybody could do this instead of seeing how different everybody is. So 7 years later, when I still wasn't able to do it, I decided to, because of pride and being very, very stubborn, I'm going to do this no matter what. I just about ruined my legs doing that seminary in 1980 in Alberta, Vajradhatu Seminary. So I think the holding still is important, but depending on your body, you might only be able to do it for 5 minutes or 10 minutes at a time. And then you should move and flex and make sure your body is okay. And then you can return to that position. I don't know what physical therapist would say about that, but I would say that if you're listening to what your body is saying, then that's probably better than what somebody else who is not in your body is telling you. I don't care how high of a platform they're sitting on. You should listen to your own body. Trust yourself, not somebody else.
So how important is the posture? Because, you said stretch and then come back to your posture. But what if I'm alternating postures throughout the 4 hours, rotating between 4 or 5 postures?
You mean like Seiza posture and then cross-legged
Kneeling,
posture?
cross-legged, knees up, legs out.
Here's how it looks to me after working with this for 40 plus years. Whatever your posture is, hold still. Stillness is more important than any posture, although I think that having the spine very straight seems to be important to what's happening in the mind, as far as the awareness of how things are moving and flowing. I don't know that as any kind of fact, but it seems like if you can hold something, the back very, very straight and the head up, and you're looking straight ahead at a wall or at the floor, it seems to help. This is a posture, this cosmic mudra, although I've probably done more of this resting in the mind mudra than anything. It seems like the rest of the cosmic mudra, or the thumbs left over right with the thumbs barely touching, because it's such a non-casual position. It's a part of the body you can hold very formally, and the thumbs are very, very touching. It seems to have a lot to do with the ability of the mind to just be still and be quiet, or see that things are not still and not quiet in the mind, that they're cranking up or spinning around more.
I guess I do have one more question about posture, because what's been happening lately is just some muscle problems in my back with just constant. There's no posture where I'm out of that. So the mind is just like completely locked into how those muscles feel. I'm just wondering, I guess how to relate to that in meditation, where it's just I'm completely absorbed with my body.
You're saying that sitting in a chair doesn't help?
No.
Laying back doesn't help? No, there's nothing that helps.
It's just like these little spasms I've been getting. The muscles knot up really bad.
Okay.
I've been thinking about getting a backiotomy and removing my torso.
Yeah.
And get a robot torso.
Mm-hmm.
I'd be
Do
stronger.
we sell those here?
I mean, it's not like pain.
Yeah.
It's just it's uncomfortable, and it's like I can sit there and I know when I'm hurting myself and when I'm not. And I'm not hurting myself, but it's enough of a sensation where my mind is fixated on it.
What's the time frame?
What do you mean?
You come in and you sit down.
I
start
can usually
writing.
get about anywhere between 20 minutes and an hour before it starts.
And does it help to get up and do a walking meditation?
I've not done any.
Okay, then I would recommend see if you couldn't do some. How about standing meditation?
I've not done any.
I would recommend start with standing meditation, facing, if you're in the Doan seat, facing out, or if you're along the wall, facing the wall. I would start with that, standing, and see if alternating that helps, because it's the stillness that's important, even standing. And then, but if that doesn't work, then possibly slow kinhin, I would think. That's a fairly precise movement, kinhin. Try that and see how that works. And then if you still have the difficulty, then would laying down help? Yeah, I would go and it's not about torture. So I would go and lay down until give yourself a break there, and then come back to the cushion. If that's a day when you're practicing all day, do it that way. More. Okay. Any questions here for either me or for Chiezan? Yes.
Standing meditation,
Yeah.
what hand mudra would you suggest there?
Then shashu, like the arms parallel to the floor, like so, with the thumb tucked like this, standing like so, and looking at the wall. You could look out into the room, but it seems to be a little bit less discursive thought if you're looking at a wall, because it doesn't stimulate daydreaming particularly. Okay.
Earlier you mentioned being a good host to
Yes.
something that arises.
Yes.
How do you know if you're being a good host?
Well, you know when you're not being a good host, because you're trying to keep something out and you're fighting with it and you don't want to let it in, and you haven't even checked its credentials yet.
Sometimes it seems like that kind of not being a good host arises spontaneously.
It does. That's called awareness, though. You see it as arising. You see that antagonism about something that's trying to come your way is arising spontaneously. And that's awareness that sees that. And so you don't have to do anything. You don't have to do anything other than I'll rephrase it. Be a good host to not being a good host. See the way in which you're doing it. It feels crazy to do that, because you actually feel like you're caving into the craziness. And in a sense you are. What you're doing, you're not going to go to war with that craziness, which feels like losing, which who wants to lose? But that's the kind of disappointment that Trungpa was talking about when he said that the path to awakening is one disappointment after another until the final disappointment, which is awakening. It feels that way, and we don't really want to do that, because it feels threatening. But how do we start? Be a good host. And how does that feel? It feels like seeing that you can't do it. over and over and over again until something starts to break.
Is it necessary to eventually see what you are objecting to?
Yes.
Beyond the objection?
Eventually you will, if you're persistent. Eventually you'll see the whole, what do they call those, enchilada. See the whole enchilada. Beto?
Yes. I've spent a lot of time considering the relationship between teachers and students. Has been a beautiful exchange. I'm wondering how each of you are feeling right now about your Dokusan.
Go ahead.
When I realized Sokuzan was my teacher, which took quite a while, it was effortless to tell him everything because he doesn't say trust me, he says give me the benefit of the doubt, but I trust my teacher, and I know that there's something I need to see and that he can help me see it. So it's effortless to talk to him, even when I'm upset with him, a willingness to tell him that
You're upset with me.
it's just communication. It's just easier for me with him. Unless he doesn't tell me what I want to hear.
So what I would say is the only time I know I'm a teacher is when I have a student in front of me. And when I have a really good student, I realize that really good student helps me be a good student. I could say, well, yeah, I'm a good teacher, but it's really about always being a student. If you ever graduate to being a good teacher as a teacher, you're probably starting to cover up what you need to see some way.
Do you feel that you were helped this evening, and do you feel like as if you were helpful?
Oh, I have no idea. I have no idea.
Oftentimes, it's not necessarily what Sokuzan says. There's always something that's helpful, but I don't know that it's always in the form of information. Part of it is the willingness to be vulnerable and to not know something and realize that I really, really don't know something very fundamental I don't know. Just acknowledging that sometimes is helpful.
Anything else?
When you say you have a good student,
As opposed to bad ones?
well, you use the term good.
I did. A good student.
I think so. You have a good
And
student.
a good student is someone who's giving me the benefit of the doubt right up to the edge of the cliff. Someone who's willing to give me the benefit of the doubt, because anybody that works with me, the longer they work with me, the scarier, or should I say, more scaredest it gets. It's going to get scary.
For you too?
Of course. I'm terrified right now. When I say terrified, not exactly, but the original trepidation about facing my teacher 40 plus years ago has not really left. It's just I'm no longer trying to get rid of that. Okay.
Oh, you kind of just talked about it right then. I was going to ask, what is that terror or that trepidation that you experience as a teacher?
Well, the fear still arises, but there's no one who's afraid. And I talk about this all the time. So to help people see, you do not have to get rid of the fear. You don't have to get rid of the problems. Getting rid of the problems just makes a successful ego. I finally got rid of that. I used to feel this way, but now I don't. Well, the idea is to see what is fundamentally real and what is not real. There is no solid being anywhere. If you see that, then everything, then you just dance with everything. Or not. Stone woman gets up dancing. The wooden man begins to sing. It's like it's real and it's not real at the same time. How do you describe non-dual, not two? A teacher and a student are really not separate. More?
It seems like I've heard you talk about love with the teacher and also about devotion. What is devotion for a teacher?
It's a willingness to go over the cliff.
Is that something that deepens with your relationships?
It does. It got really deep for me after my first teacher died. It was deepening, but then after he went, then I realized who I was talking to. Wasn't completely sure. I just knew that I needed to do something, and he was the best show in the Midway. So I gave him the benefit of the doubt as long as I could, even though I really did not like Tibetan Buddhism. My original inspiration was Zen in the 60s. So running into Tibetan Buddhism, it's like, I was in the Zen guy instead of a Tibetan guy. But that was just not being particularly happy with the way all of the fancy things that are involved with Tibetan Buddhism. Vajrayana. But I did it anyway.
What did that change look like for you after he passed?
Looked like he was gone. There's more there if you want to ask it.
How did that deepen that sense of devotion?
Because I realized that who he was had not gone. His body vanished. That he is not gone anywhere. He's right here. Something he said once that has always been very magical to me. And he said, listening to me is like listening to a dead man. That's an interesting koan.
Are you still listening to him?
Right now, all the time.
How does that look?
Don't be silly. You can't interrogate me. Other questions? Sheldon?
Chiezan,
Yes.
when you were describing the difficulties that you had at the beginning, you said being last.
Yeah.
What were you talking about?
I think about when Sokuzan talks about Kobin, how he ignored him. And he practiced anyway. And I'm looking for the inspiration that if I was completely ignored, that I would still be motivated to practice.
How is that being last?
The ego. I mean, to feel excluded or not appreciated. I mean, all the credentials we usually get. I mean, if those are my motivation, it just seems my practice will fall to pieces at some point because they're so artificial. And I just want to make sure that my motivation is not dependent on what other people think about me.
So do you mean that you want to be last?
I want to have a sincere practice regardless of what happens.
Question from Christine Rahala in Traverse City.
Yes.
First of all, she said, this is helpful, thank you. And then her question is, how can Trungpa Rinpoche be present if he is a composite of dependent arising?
I don't know. I don't know how to answer that. That's a hard one. I can't answer that. It's conceptual. Further questions from anyone?
I'm trying not to ask this. I feel like I'm going to ask it every day, though.
Good.
Is it worth it?
It's what worth it?
All of this.
Oh, yes.
Did you
Yeah.
ever read Alice in Wonderland or Through the Looking Glass? You know, the idea of the
Familiar.
running in place as fast
Yes.
as you can to stay
Yes.
put.
Lewis Carroll's wonderful imagination. Is it worth it?
Yeah, because, you know, like the Tibetan vision of the Garuda flying, you know, like that was my vision before of what all this sitting would result in. I would just like, my feet would never touch the ground. I'd be flying my whole life. I'd be brave. And now I think I'm more like the White Queen or Red Queen or whoever, running in place to stay put.
Well, I would just say, just keep going no matter what. This is the inspiration that I got from Trungpa Rinpoche. It's just when I would tell him all the negativity that I was going through and that I was feeling, he would just say, "You can do it. Just keep going, keep going." And that really, I felt like who I was talking to that at that time would not deceive me. It was very helpful to me. It's hard for me to talk about him without weeping. So I'm having a hard time right now.
It feels like a marathon every time I sit. It feels like I'm running a marathon every time I sit. And, you know, like,
Yeah, I know.
there's,
I can tell you the same thing. Just don't stop. Don't give up. Don't give up. Because you'll be back around again at the start, at the starting line again. We keep coming back. This is like a big school.
there's no medal at the end. There's no
there's
fruit.
no- yeah, there isn't.
Then how is it worth it? I guess.
Because you see the truth. You see that you're not separate from anything. You actually see it yourself. You actually get to see what this representation, what this was talking about, and you don't have any doubts about it. You're not like, oh, I'm not sure if I see this or not. If you're having those thoughts, then you don't. You need to get back on the treadmill or whatever it is that you have an image of that's your. And you don't end up replicating. I'm not anything like Trungpa. I'm nothing like Kokenjin Roshi. No, I don't teach the same way. I'm nothing like them at all. And yet, without them, I would not be sitting here. Just like Chiezan was saying, I'm very affectionate. A lot of people don't want that. They don't want someone to be extremely intimate with them right away. And I can't help that. I can't help to be that way. I don't know. Like he's saying, he's not ready to do that, and he doesn't have to. He needs to be himself. He needs to be who he is. Teach the way he teaches. He might be more like someone. I might be more like Rinpoche, more like Koben, or not like me at all. Don't have to copy me. Any other questions?
When you say keep going, you mean keep sitting?
All of it. Keep sitting, relate to the Sangha, relate to the teacher. That's why they have the three jewels, the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. Each one of those is a power, seems to be necessary for our path. I'm not saying it's for every spiritual path, but for ours, it's necessary to have a teaching person, have a teaching, and have a group of people who are studying that. We've talked about Sangha just recently. It's so important to rub up against people who might not even be your friends, and might not be the company you would pick that would let you off the hook all the time. That kind of friend, but a kind of friend that would be really sincere and be supportive of you on this path, and have a teaching that you can. That will support you intellectually, conceptually, and then have a teaching person who you can give the benefit of the doubt to. Keep going.
I have a question that
Sure.
I wanted to ask earlier today. Someone asked about sitting and then getting up off of the cushion. I think you said that you answered a question about sitting and then getting up and interacting with people. Maybe being able to see more clearly. I can't remember clearly right now what it was you said, but my question was, if we're only sitting and not getting up off of the cushion and interacting and just like only sitting in the cave, I mean, is it possible? Like, is that can that be the entire path? Is it possible for, like, do you have to have the other elements which you're talking about, the three jewels, go sit in the cave for 5 years?
I think I see what you're saying, and I think it's I wouldn't rule it out. I think it's less likely, but the causes and conditions that arise for each of us in our life, just look back over your life and just see all the things that had to come in place for you to even be in this room. It's astonishing that we're all here. If you look at the causes and conditions, just like who's writing this script, it's just how did this come about this very evening? Not to mention us in the room, but the people who are looking at this from as far away as possibly Portugal. Astonishing situation. And so I don't know for sure, but it looks like the more support you can have to do this, I think you could go off in a cave. I don't think I could have. I would not be here without Trungpa Rinpoche or even meeting Koben. I think I needed both of those situations when I look back, but I don't know. Maybe not. It's hard to say for sure. There's no guarantee of anything. Things are so complicated. And I'm still looking in so many different directions, more now about how can I help people the people I meet are having so much difficulty. And so I'm looking in every direction I can to find anything I can do to be supportive of them in their awareness practice. Not just Buddhism, anything I can find that will help people. So, not sure if that addresses your question, but I'm highly motivated to help people that are coming and will come and give me permission to help. I gotta have the permission. I'm not here to market anything or advertise. I mean, this may seem like some kind of a sales thing. I don't know. If it does, then maybe it does. But it's not intended. It's intended to present something a certain way. If you resonate with this, then I'm here, he's here, we're here. This Sangha is here to help people. So you've come here. You had a lot of trepidation. Other people that are here think, should I go do that? Is this going to be something that's helpful to me or not? So anything else? Any other questions before we close? Any questions outside? Oh, off in the dissonance. Okay. We'll dedicate the mirror.
In the back of your red book is the dedication of merit. We do have Dana boxes out in the hallway. We gladly receive your help. And online, you can donate.
May the merit of this penetrate into all places, so that we and every sentient being together can realize the Buddha's way. Chiezan Chiezan Busan Mokosan SokukoJi. The 10 directions, the 3 worlds, all Buddhas, all venerable ones, Bodhisattvas, Mahasattvas, the great Prajna Paramita.